Welcome to BeFrightened. We tell stories that will keep you up or help you sleep at night. We'd been driving for hours, scouting locations for our indie film, when we spotted a diner in a tiny Midwest town. Our crew was starving, so we stopped. As soon as we pulled into the parking lot, something didn't seem right. The place looked like it was stuck in the 1950s. The moment we walked in, the whole place went dead silent. There were about 50 people inside, and every single one of them turned to stare at us. It felt like we'd interrupted something important. I looked at Lance, our director. Even he looked shaken, and this guy had previously filmed in a war zone. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. It felt like we were in some twisted episode of The Twilight Zone. After what felt like forever, a waitress finally approached us. She was middle-aged with frizzy hair and a name tag that read Darlene. She was holding a plate of steaming food, which made my mouth water. Darlene asked us flatly what we wanted. No typical diner hospitality. It was much more direct, straight to the point. It really caught me off guard. I nervously said we were hoping for some food, mentioning how hungry we were after driving all day. Darlene's expression remained unchanged, as she replied strangely that they don't serve food. Confused, I pointed out the obvious, that she was holding a plate of food. I regretted it immediately, as it felt like every eye in the place seemed to stare at me. Darlene insisted again that they didn't serve food. As we stood there, I noticed the patrons weren't just staring, they were scrutinizing us. One man near the counter muttered something under his breath, and a woman beside him shook her head slowly, while still staring at us. My unease grew. I tried to catch snippets of the conversations, but they were all whispering indistinctly. It felt like we had walked into something that we shouldn't have. Darlene's presence didn't help. She stood there, standing between us and some well-needed food and coffee. From the far corner of the diner, an old man started mumbling about something. Then some other folks nodded like they understood. Then, one by one, they began to rise from their seats. Not all at once, but one after another. Slow and deliberate. They didn't move towards us. They just stood there, forming a loose circle. Didn't say a word, but I recall their eyes were intense. Alicia, our sound tech, was looking terrified, and even Joseph, our grip, who was a big guy, looked like he wanted to bolt for it. I told Darlene that we were leaving and thanked her for her hospitality. The sarcasm in my voice was clear. As we turned to leave, I swear I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The other patrons, the ones who hadn't moved since we entered, were now slowly rising from their seats. Not all at once, mind you. That would have been less creepy. No, they stood up one by one, like some kind of bizarre reverse domino effect. We practically ran to the van, fumbling with the keys in our haste to get out of there. As I started the engine, I looked back at the diner. Every single person who had been inside was now standing outside, watching us. They didn't say anything. They didn't wave. They just watched, making sure we left. We obliged by getting out of Dodge. We drove in silence for a good 20 minutes before anyone spoke. Alicia finally spoke up, asking what the fuck that was all about. I said I didn't have a clue, but joked that we'd found a great location to film our next indie horror film. For the next few hours, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was some kind of practical joke. Maybe the whole town was in on it. Maybe we'd stumbled onto the set of some weird reality TV show. But we all knew that something truly strange had happened in that diner. We ended up driving through the night, none of us willing or wanting to stop in another small town. We didn't talk much, each lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of the unexplainable. As the sun began to rise, I kept thinking about what we'd seen. It didn't fit with anything I knew, like we'd stumbled onto something secret. I've been on plenty of film sets, seen all sorts of special effects and movie magic, but nothing has ever unsettled me quite like that diner in the middle of nowhere. That weird night stuck with us. We never went back to that town. Sometimes I still think about Darlene and that plate of food. It doesn't make any more sense now than it did then. Just another Friday night in my quiet West Virginia town. I was laying on my bed, scrolling through my phone when I received a message from my buddy Stuart about the prom. He was always hyped about everything, but I wasn't that excited. It was just another excuse to get dressed up and pretend we were fancy for a night. The week before prom flew by. I got roped into dress shopping with Mom, who insisted on something appropriate. We settled on a sparkly blue dress that was a bit too tight, but Mom loved it. Saturday night came, and I squeezed into the dress, wincing as Mom yanked on my hair, trying to style it. Dad snapped pictures, most of them blurry. We piled into the car, the fabric of my dress rustling against the seats. The high school gym looked like, well, a high school gym with some streamers and balloons. But everyone was dressed up, so I guess that made it special. The air was full with perfume and aftershave, and the bass from the speakers made the floor vibrate. I danced with my friends, sipped some punch that tasted a bit off, and watched couples sneak off to the parking lot. Jack and Keitha were being their usual selves, all lovey-dovey and inseparable. Cassandra hung around them, third-wheeling as always. As the night went on, Jack started stumbling around. He had a flask and was sharing it with everyone. When it got to me, I took a drink and cringed. It was strong stuff. Keitha was already pretty drunk, laughing at nothing. Cassandra hesitated, but ended up drinking some too. Around midnight, I saw them heading out. Jack had his arm around Keitha, both of them laughing at some inside joke. Cassandra trailed behind, wobbling a bit in her heels. I thought about saying something, offering a ride maybe, but my date pulled me back to the dance floor. The rest of prom was a mix of blasting music and sweaty dancing. Some couples snuck off to make out in quiet spots. When I finally got home, my feet hurt like crazy, and my hair was all over the place. I just fell into bed without even changing, totally wiped out. I woke up with a pounding headache and a mouth that tasted gross. I dragged myself downstairs and saw Mom in the kitchen. She looked scared and upset. Then she told me what happened. She told me about an accident. The next few days felt unreal. Our whole town was stunned. We found out what happened in pieces. Jack's car had gone off the road near the river, rolling down the steep bank and into the water. Just like that, all three of them were gone. School was a nightmare. Empty desks where Jack, Keitha, and Cassandra used to sit. Lockers turned into makeshift memorials, covered in photos and notes. The hallways were weirdly quiet. Everyone talked real low, like they were afraid to make too much noise. The funerals were held back to back. 3 caskets, 3 grieving families, one stunned community. I sat there in the church, the same dress I'd worn to prom now serving as mourning clothes. The priest talked about God's plan and being in a better place, but it all sounded hollow. Rumors started circulating. Someone overheard the cops talking. Apparently, there was evidence that Cassandra might have survived the initial crash. The idea of her stuck in that car as it sank kept running through my mind. It really messed me up. Did she fight to get out? Did she scream for help? Or did she just close her eyes and wait for the end? The aftermath was a whirlwind of grief counselors, assemblies about drunk driving, and parents cracking down on curfews. For a while, no one dared to touch alcohol if they were driving. We organized ride shares, crashed at friends' houses, called our parents for rides no matter how late. But as time passed, things started to go back to normal. Or a new normal, I guess. People laughed again, made plans for the future. Life went on. But for those of us who were there that night, something had changed. I found myself thinking about choices, how one decision can change everything. If Jack had called for a ride, if someone had taken his keys, if I had offered them a lift when I saw them leaving. So many what ifs. Sometimes, driving past that stretch of road by the river, I'd slow down. I'd think about Jack, Keitha, and Cassandra, about the futures they'll never have, about how it could have been any of us. That's the thing about growing up in a small town. When something like this happens, it leaves a mark on everyone. We all knew them, grew up with them. Their absence was felt everywhere, in the classrooms, at the local diner, during football games. As the years went by, the pain dulled, but it never really went away. For those of us who were there, there's always this sadness that sticks around. It's like a silent reminder of what we lost. Life's weird that way. You can't tell which moments will stay with you forever, or which choices will change everything. It's a shame it took losing 3 friends for us to get that. The day I stood in that courtroom, my palms were sweating as I prepared to testify about a bomb threat at our middle school. It was about as far from my usual routine as you could get. One minute, I'm teaching kids about chemical reactions. The next, I'm caught up in a mess that turned our small town upside down. In our town, the most action we usually saw was a tractor breaking down on Main Street. Then suddenly, we're living in an episode of Law and Order. Our town was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The kind of town where the biggest news was usually who won the pie-eating contest at the county fair, or whose kid made it onto the honor roll. But that all changed the day we received a bomb threat. Tuesday, 4th period. I'd barely started my lesson on chemical properties when Principal Garrett's voice sounded over the intercom. His words were urgent. Evacuate now, bomb threat, not a drill. For a moment, the room went dead silent. Then the panic hit. Kids started grabbing their backpacks. Some burst into tears, others froze in their seats. I had to raise my voice to be heard over the chaos, telling everyone to line up at the door. We were going to walk out calmly, I said, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. Students and teachers flooded the halls, pouring out of the building. Our quiet neighborhood transformed as police descended on the school. Sirens blared and officers moved swiftly, securing the perimeter. In the parking lot, it was pure mayhem. Hundreds of kids milled around, some crying, others on their phones trying to reach their parents. I spotted a group of my students gathered together, looking lost and scared. Making my way over to them, I tried to offer some reassurance, but the truth was, I was pretty freaked out myself. Rumors spread as we waited. Students shared stories of strange packages and possible pranks. Without facts, fear and speculation took hold. The lack of information left us all on edge. It wasn't until late that evening that we got any real answers. The police had searched the entire school and found nothing. No bomb, no suspicious packages, nothing out of the ordinary. But they were taking the threat seriously. School was canceled for the rest of the week while they continued their investigation. The bomb threat left our town reeling. Reporters swarmed in, disrupting our usual quiet. Parents kept a close watch on their kids. At the grocery store, gossip flowed freely as locals tried to make sense of the situation. About a week after the threat, I got a call from the police station. They wanted me to come in and answer some questions. Apparently, they traced the threat back to an email sent from a computer in the school's science lab. I felt uneasy. I'd used the lab that morning to prep an experiment, but several other teachers and numerous students had access too. I drove to the station, my thoughts in overdrive. Did they think I had something to do with this? I kept replaying the morning in my head, trying to remember every little detail. The interview was intense. They asked about my schedule that day, who I'd seen in the lab, if I'd noticed anything unusual. I answered as best I could, but it all felt like a bad dream. I'd gone into teaching to help kids, not to be interrogated by the police. In the end, it turned out to be a student, a quiet kid named Nicholas, who'd been having a rough time at home. He'd sent the threat thinking it would get him out of a test he hadn't studied for. He had no idea how much chaos he'd cause, how it would turn our whole quiet town upside down. The trial was a somber affair. I had to testify about the lab schedule, confirm that Nicholas had access to the computers that morning. It felt awful, seeing this kid I'd taught looking so small and scared in the courtroom. Watching him, I questioned every interaction we'd had. What signs had I overlooked? Nicholas was found guilty of making the bomb threat. The judge, considering his age and lack of prior offenses, sentenced him to probation and community service. The school board expelled him, citing zero tolerance for such threats. He was ordered to attend counseling and a youth intervention program. Nicholas's parents enrolled him in a private school a few towns over. Last I heard, he was keeping his head down, trying to move past the incident. For the rest of us, even after it was all over, things didn't go back to normal right away. There were new security measures at school, bag checks and ID cards. Parents who used to wave goodbye at the drop-off now walked their kids right to the front door. The carefree atmosphere of middle school had been replaced by something more wary, more guarded. But slowly, life started to get back to normal. The news vans left. Kids started joking about the Great Bomb Scare like it was just another school legend. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback, feel free to leave it in the comments below. If you have a story you'd like to share or need to contact us for any reason, you'll find our email address in the video description.